Welcome back. I'm your trainer and PMP coach, Anand. I'm glad that I'm able to contribute to your PMP certification journey. This is continuation of first chapter, Introduction to Project Management. In this session, we will focus on various components of PMBOK guide. So the learning objectives are: we will start with understanding project lifecycle and project phases. You will learn about process, its definition and process interaction. 5 process group, 10 knowledge areas. We will talk about project information, business document, and finally a quick review. What are the key components of PMBOK guide? We have project lifecycle, project phase gate, project management processes, project management process group, and project management knowledge area. You will come across above component throughout the PMBOK guide, throughout our training. So it's very important to build correct understanding of this component. They are also very critical from exam point of view because they will help you to understand the context of question. To understand the project life cycle, let's take an example of a big construction company. Every project starts with a high level of scope agreement between key stakeholder and it should be officially approved. Project will go through a detailed planning, then it will continue with a detailed design, conducting procurement, etc. Next step is actual construction, which is the phase which takes a maximum amount of time in a construction project. And finally, you will get closure agreements with the key stakeholder, hand it over to the operational team and close the project. So what is this? Initiating, planning, designing, construction and closure. This is called as a project lifecycle. PMI defines a project lifecycle as a collection of project phases. Let's look at generic lifecycle. So you start the project, organizing and planning, carry out the work and close the project. It is defined, generally project lifecycle is defined in the performing organization's project methodology and often used for a stakeholder communication. Projects are divided into number of phases. Project phase is a collection of logically related project activities that result in one or more deliverable. Think of a software development project. It will have phases like initiating, planning, design and build, test, implementation, handover. Each phase describes the work and the deliverable that phase is creating. For example, in design and build phase, team will develop a software design document, take appropriate approval, and then complete the coding. In testing phase, testing team will test the software. All the activities in this testing phase will be related to each other. It will be related to testing. It can be a system testing, integration testing, user acceptance testing. Remember, at the end of each phase, you will get some deliverable. Take another example of a construction project. So phases will be feasibility, planning, design, construction, testing, handover. The project lifecycle are different for a different application area as you just discussed for IT project and construction project. In fact, some project may have their own unique lifecycle. For example, you are a vendor and responsible only for a construction bit. So you may not have a design phase in your project, but your project will still have a unique lifecycle for a construction work. In conclusion, project lifecycle is always unique. Also, not every software company or a construction company will follow exactly the same project lifecycle that we had shown here. So some IT company may have a different phase for a software design and different phase called a build for a coding. These lifecycle and phases are defined in an organization's project management methodology. There are two types of project lifecycle. Plan-driven, predictive lifecycle, which is also called as waterfall or traditional lifecycle, and change-driven, like iterative, incremental, adaptive lifecycle. And finally, there is a combination of multiple lifecycle, which is called as hybrid lifecycle. Let's look at each of them in a detail with some examples. Predictive lifecycle or traditional waterfall approach. Think of a construction project. During the last 30 to 40 years till 2005, the waterfall approach was the gold standard for all construction projects. And of course, it is fully plan driven approach. You need to know your requirement upfront and the scope is fixed. You know what kind of building you are constructing. Is it residential building, commercial or mixed? Then how many floors will be there? How many flats on each floor? What will be the size of each flat? So everything is known upfront. Each phase is then laid out sequentially and managed carefully. Of course, remember, sometimes phases may overlap. The three main project constraints, time, scope and cost, are all determined at the detail level at the beginning of project. Waterfall was a great when I used to manage projects where requirements are clear upfront and didn't require much stakeholder involvement. They are mostly involved at the beginning and at the end or when scope change needed some approval. The downside is that waterfall is pretty inflexible when it comes to changes late in the project and therefore leads to significant cost increase when rework is needed. This is why companies started coming up with a more adaptive approaches. As time frame for delivery of a project got shorter and the requirements got less clearer, we needed an additional approach so that we could handle the changes faster and the approach should be less expensive. And this is where iterative and incremental approach are useful. Many times you will see the incremental approach grouped with the iterative approach. Now when these approaches are used, they are used when organizations need to manage changing objective and scope and partial delivery is beneficial. High-level product vision is developed and then scope is elaborated one iteration at a time. Increment successively to add more functionality to the product. And product is developed both incrementally and iteratively. They look similar, but there are certain small differences. So let's understand this through an example. Think about a banking project to understand iterative and incremental life cycle. In this project, we need to manage banks changing objective and scope. Partial delivery may be beneficial and high-level product vision is clear and the bank want to improve customer experience and ease of business, ease of banking. Following business requirements are expected to be delivered. So a project will deliver a website focusing on accounts and statement, especially for customers to do online banking. Then for internal staff, for a back office processing application will be developed. Again, for internal staff who deals with the credit card processing, a specific credit card processing application will be developed. And finally, there will be mobile application which will help a bank to improve the customer experience. So how does iterative works over here? So let's start with the definition. Iterative, it's a project life cycle where project scope is generally determined early in the project life cycle, but time and cost estimates are routinely modified as the project team understand, it improves the understanding of a product. Iteration develops the product through a series of repeated cycles by adding functionality successively, in successive iteration. Here, goal is to take a frequent feedback before reaching the final product. Feedback helps project team to learn about the stakeholder needs and expectation. So for this banking project, you will start with collecting high-level requirements. You will validate and verify those requirements. Next, you will build a basic skeleton of entire website. Through this, customer can visualize the screen and the flow, how the information, the screens are flowing, and they can provide the feedback. In the next iteration, we will add the rules, validation, improve look and feel, and we will ensure all the previous feedbacks are incorporated. And further feedback, new feedback will be generated. Finally, you complete all integration, add the operational functionalities, complete end-to-end testing, and release the entire application to customer. So the development and refinement happens iteratively through a prototype or demo to customer, so that you can learn, yeah, you can get a learning opportunities and provide feedback. So in this way, this process helps in delivering a right product to a end consumer. Incremental life cycle. A project life cycle in which the deliverable is produced through a series of iterations that successively add functionality within a predetermined time span. Each increment contains sufficient capability to be considered usable. In simple word, it is like we need to develop 4 things, we develop them one by one instead of working all of them in one go. In this bank example, in first increment, we develop a website with a critical customer interaction, deploy it to server, and it is available for customer to use. In second increment, we add operational back office capabilities, for example, credit card processing, deploy it, and again it is ready to be used. In third increment, we add additional features like mobile app, social integration, etc. Each increment delivers additional functionality for the product and is repeated until the final deliverable is produced. Customer gets early business value through each increment. And finally, customer signs off at the each exit point. Adaptive life cycle. A project life cycle that is iterative and incremental. It means this life cycle is a mix of iterative and incremental development. We add features incrementally, but they can be changed based on received feedback. This is not entirely new concept. Over a period of time, industry use many such approaches. Agile is an umbrella term for several iterative and incremental software development approaches. The most popular Agile framework includes SCRUM, feature-driven development, extreme programming, dynamic system development method, etc. This life cycle is used in rapidly changing environment when requirement and scope is difficult to define. It involves fixed time and cost, scope is broadly defined and will be refined as progresses. It is agile way of doing things as it is intended for a project where high level of changes are expected. It needs ongoing stakeholder involvement. Basically, agile team is a mix of technical, business, functional, so all work together towards achieving agile project's goal. Let's understand how agile works. In agile, scope is decomposed into set of requirements called product backlog, and it goes through a prioritization by business. Requirements to be delivered for each sprint are agreed in the sprint backlog. This is also referred as a scope of that particular sprint. Iterations are rapid 2 to 4 weeks and are fixed in time and cost. At the end of each sprint, shippable product is ready. In software project, releasable software is ready. Customer can change a prioritized requirement in each of the iteration. PMBOK guide also include a flavor of agile in terms of adaptive life cycle. The ever-changing need of customers and the inability to foresee the market and predict the behavior are one of the key drivers to make this transition for most of the organization. Exam will test your understanding about how you will differentiate this life cycle in terms of requirements, activities, delivery approach, and goal. So this is a summary slide of what we had learned so far, where we will try to differentiate between all these 4 approaches. So in predictive, requirements are fixed, activities are performed once for the entire project, there is a single delivery, and goal is to deliver scope within agreed cost and on time. In iterative, requirements are dynamic, activities are repeated until deliverables are correct and approved. Single delivery is expected and goal is to deliver correct solution. Incremental life cycle, requirements are dynamic, activities are performed once for each iteration, frequent smaller deliveries are expected, goal is to deliver fast and provide early business value. And finally, adaptive life cycle, so requirements are dynamic, activities are repeated until deliverables are correct and approved. Frequent smaller deliveries are expected, and goal is to provide customer value via frequent deliveries and feedback. Hybrid lifecycle. Many projects are launched with aggressive schedule, vague scope, and resource constraint, which raise implementation risk. Agile methodologies have been used effectively to mitigate this risk. However, some projects may not be well suited to adopt full-fledged Agile technique. In this case, a hybrid of Agile and Waterfall techniques can be much better. The project is managed in a more typical Waterfall fashion where scope and requirements are defined upfront, analysis and design is also done upfront. But the development and testing are broken into iterations similar to SCRUM, where multiple sprints are used to deliver the product. To summarize, project elements that are well known or have a fixed requirement follow a predictive approach, and those project elements that are still evolving follow the adaptive approach.